My girlfriend told her group of friends that our baby might not be his because I had been acting distant. The sentence, spoken by my friend Justin over the phone, hung in the sterile air of my office like a verdict. It was such a precise inversion of the truth that I almost laughed. A dry, bitter sound that would have certainly concerned my cubicle neighbor. I was the one who had acted distant. I was the one who was suspicious. And the reason I was suspicious was because of the constant, chilling anxiety that Chloe, my partner of 2 years, was running a play on me. I am Isaac, a 30-year-old finance analyst, and my life is built on columns and rows of undeniable data. When I decided to have a child with Chloe, the logic was sound. We had a stable relationship, complementary personalities, and the financial means. We had even spent weeks working through a detailed spreadsheet listing childcare costs, college funds, and potential neighborhood schools. To me, this baby was the ultimate long-term investment, secured by my careful planning. Now, at 7 months pregnant, Chloe was radiant, undeniably excited. But I, the father-to-be, was drowning in the rising tide of fear. The nursery, which I had spent every weekend assembling with the precision of a German engineer, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a carefully constructed set piece. I had the $200 crib, the organic cotton bedding, and the smart monitor. But I didn't have the proof. The fear wasn't new, it was ancient, woven into the fabric of my being by my mother, Valerie. After my parents divorced when I was just 7, my mother, a woman prone to emotional extremes, constantly reminded me of the deception she had suffered. She never detailed the full story, only that she had been tricked and betrayed by my father, and that men were perpetually susceptible to schemes. She taught me that true stability lay only in control. This insidious lesson had made me a successful analyst, but a guarded, terrified partner. My first alarm bells rang faintly around the 3-month mark, when I was still struggling to internalize the pregnancy news. It was unplanned, a failure of my logical risk assessment. When I told Valerie, she didn't offer congratulations. She simply looked at me, her expression a careful mixture of concern and pity. "How convenient, Isaac," she had said, her voice soft but sharp, like broken glass. "Right when you two were talking about buying a house. I've seen girls like Chloe before. Be careful not to let ambition cloud your judgment." That single phrase, convenient timing, was like a pin dropping in a silent room. It didn't provide evidence, but it offered a narrative framework that instantly clicked into my deepest fears. My mother, the ultimate authority on betrayal in my universe, had planted the seed. After that conversation, I began to watch Chloe. I justified it as simple interest in her day. "Where did you go today for lunch? Who did you see? Did you talk to that coworker you mentioned?" I found myself running silent audits of her time when she was exhausted and distracted. The natural state of a woman growing a human being. I saw it as distance. When she was quiet, I saw it as secretiveness. Chloe, being the open person she is, offered me her passwords and access to her phone location without a fight. This should have been the end of it. The logical side of my brain noted, if she were hiding something, she wouldn't do this. But my emotional brain, the one poisoned by Valerie, whispered, "She is so calm because she is confident. She knows the truth, and she's just putting on a show." Her openness became proof of her calculated confidence, not her innocence. It was this twisted, internal logic that I had been sharing with my friend Justin and the rest of our group chat, a band of guys who had known me since high school. Justin, gregarious and always hungry for drama, had been the most encouraging voice. He'd framed my paranoid questions as valid concerns for a soon-be father. Now, Justin had called me, not to ask about the baby, but to relay some spurious gossip he'd heard about Chloe's own friends. Gossip that suggested they thought was the one being deceived. My girlfriend told her group of friends that our baby might not be his because I had been acting distant. The absurdity was dizzying. I was the architect of the distance, and I was the one who harbored the doubt. And yet, somehow, the narrative had already flipped, painting me as the oblivious, slightly checked-out partner. I hung up the phone feeling colder, recognizing that my paranoia had achieved exactly what I feared most: loss of control over the story, and the real possibility of being made into the fool. My only solace was that I had managed to keep my own group chat, the one where we genuinely discussed my suspicions, a total secret from Chloe. I had secured the evidence, I needed, and now I just needed the courage to use it. Following Valerie's comment, I felt a cold dread, the sensation I now recognize as the moment my mother's fear finally succeeded in latching onto me, demanding tangible proof of an unseen threat. That phone call with Justin, where he inverted the truth about who was paranoid, only solidified my need for total vigilance. I was the financial analyst, the risk assessor, and I couldn't accept uncertainty in the one place where stakes were highest: my family. My monitoring of Chloe intensified from casual checks to a forensic investigation. The worst part was how easily I justified it. I wasn't being controlling, I was being proactive. I was being a good provider, protecting my investment. "Where did you go today for lunch?" I would ask, leaning against the kitchen counter as she kicked off her shoes. The question sounded innocent, but the tone, even to my own ears, had shifted from interested partner to interrogator. "Just Sarah's," she might answer, mentioning her childhood friend. "We talked about the baby shower list." I would nod, pretending to absorb the information, while in my head I referenced the location on the Life 360 app she'd given me access to, making sure the reported location and the actual location matched. They always did. Yet, the relief was fleeting, instantly replaced by a new, more insidious doubt. She was too perfect. Her story was too clean. A real cheater would be messy, nervous. Chloe was calm. I started sharing these observations in our group chat, a conversation initially meant for planning our fantasy football league. I called it the Truth Seekers, a name that, looking back, was sickeningly self-important. Justin, whose own life was a predictable stream of minor drama, found my anxieties thrilling. "She's been distant since the second trimester," I typed one night, while Chloe was asleep in the next room. "She's always on her phone, but if I ask who it is, she just says work or mom." Justin was quick to respond. "Dude, you're 7 months in. You have to secure the paternity. She's too calm. That's the biggest red flag. The ones who are guilty are always the coolest about it." His words, validated by the immediate agreement of 3 other guys, became gospel. They weren't seeing the exhaustion, the nausea, the literal miracle of growing a human. They were seeing the narrative I was feeding them, the too calm girlfriend with the convenient pregnancy. They were seeing the movie version of a deceitful woman, because that's the script I handed them. The paranoia built like pressure in a sealed container. Every tired sigh from Chloe, every late response to a text message, which I meticulously timed 40 minutes once, was logged as another data point proving my suspicions. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I had found her phone sitting face up on the kitchen island. A message popped up from her coworker, a man named Daniel. It was innocuous, something about a shared document, but the simple fact that a man I didn't fully trust had initiated contact sent a spike of panic through me. I snatched the phone up, heart pounding. I stood there, frozen, trying to decide if I could invade her privacy like this. My training, my logic screamed no. But Valerie's voice, cold and insistent, echoed in my mind. "You can't let her trick you, Isaac. You can't be the fool." I scrolled through the recent messages with Daniel. They were, predictably, completely benign. But in my panicked state, I interpreted the professional tone as calculated distance, designed to hide something deeper. I placed the phone back down, my body vibrating with a frantic energy. Later that night, I went into the Truth Seekers chat and unleashed the full scope of my fear. I wrote a long, detailed account of my suspicions, mentioning Daniel and other men I'd heard her mention in passing. I concluded by asking them, my inner circle, if I was crazy to think the baby might not be mine. The responses were instant and overwhelming. The consensus was clear: I wasn't crazy. I was careful. And then, Justin created the poll. It was titled, "Who's the Father?" And it listed my name, Daniel, another coworker I barely knew, and finally, a mocking, anonymous option. The guys piled in, commenting and voting, turning the fate of my child into a sick, anonymous joke. Justin even added an option, the Uber driver. Just to show me, he said, how ridiculous and easy it was for her to find someone. Reading those votes and comments, the crude jokes, the assumption of my partner's moral flexibility, didn't bring me peace. It didn't solve my problem. Instead, it fully initiated me into a conspiracy of my own making. I had actively chosen my internal fear and the group's corrosive support over the evidence of Chloe's character, and the trust I had once shared with her. I had successfully created a toxic, shared narrative, convincing 15 guys that my loving partner was a cheating liar. I stared at the poll, the evidence of my paranoia, and realized I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a terrible, cold certainty that I was about to be betrayed. I just needed the right moment to act on it. The atmosphere had grown thick with tension, a palpable pressure that felt entirely of my making. The group chat, the truth seekers, had been silent for 2 days, a kind of anticipatory hush that I mistook for solemn support. This silence, combined with the 700 other lies and insecurities buzzing in my head, culminated at the family's annual 4th of July barbecue. It was the perfect stage for my emotional outburst, a grand setting for the tragic drama I felt I was living. Valerie's family, the Wests, always hosted the event at their sprawling property. 50 people were scattered across the lawn, cousins, uncles, friends, and the entire toxic ecosystem that had formed my childhood. The smell of charcoal and cut grass mixed with the sweet, cloying scent of sunscreen. Everyone was smiling, drinking beer, and throwing bean bags. Everything was exactly as it should be, which made the deception I believed to be lurking underneath feel even more egregious. I'd had 3 beers, 3 more than I should have, and each one had chipped away at the thin veneer of my self-control. I kept watching Chloe. She was wearing a simple maternity sundress, her 7-month bump prominent and beautiful. She was laughing easily with my cousin, completely unaware of the jury being assembled around her. I saw her warmth and translated it, through my mother's lens, as confidence in her deception. Justin found me by the grill, whispering, "You doing it, man. Time to take back control." His words hit the sweet spot of my fear. Control. That's what this was always about. I wasn't going to be the fool my father supposedly was. I was Isaac, the analyst, the controller. I walked toward the back deck, stepping up onto the raised wooden platform. I grabbed a fresh beer, holding it up like a prop. The crowd was naturally drawn to the deck for speeches or announcements. I cleared my throat, feeling the eyes of 50 people turn toward me. My heart hammered, not with fear, but with a terrible, perverse sense of triumph. I was finally acting. I was finally taking the risk out of the equation. "Hey everyone, can I get your attention for a minute?" I called out. The music quieted. I just wanted to say something about family, about truth, and about the future. I paused, scanning the faces. I saw Chloe look up, her smile bright, expecting a sweet, sentimental speech about becoming parents. I saw Valerie in her white sun hat, watching me with an expression of intense, quiet expectation. I swallowed hard, the beer suddenly tasting metallic. I forced myself to look directly at Chloe. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about honesty, and about what it means to be a man. I started, the words sounding practiced, rehearsed from the toxic echo chamber of my own head. I am not going to let anyone make a fool out of me or trap me into something that isn't real. The shift in the crowd was immediate. The easy smiles tightened. Chloe's expression crumbled from anticipation to utter confusion. Then I delivered the line I knew would destroy everything, but which felt, in that moment, like the only way to save myself. I looked right at her, standing there beautiful and pregnant. I declared, "My girlfriend told her group of friends that our baby might not be his because I had been acting distant. I am not going to live with doubt. I will be getting a DNA test as soon as this baby is born because I deserve to know the truth about whether this kid is even mine." The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it was the longest silence of my life. I had inverted the truth. I had projected my paranoia onto Chloe, twisting Justin's spurious gossip into her direct confession, claiming that she was the one who spread the doubt. I had made my lie sound like her admission. Then the terrible sound of affirmation began. Valerie stood up from her chair, walked over to me, and wrapped me in a tight public hug. I felt the relief, the validation I had craved for months. She whispered loud enough for the people closest to hear, "I am so proud of you, Isaac, for standing up for yourself. Don't let her trap you." My father, Franklin, who had been quietly tending the grill, dropped his spatula. His face went blank, stripped bare, the expression of a man who had just seen his own life's great mistake repeat itself in front of 50 strangers. Then, my Uncle Robert, already half drunk, started slow clapping. Clap, clap, clap. A few others joined in, scattered across the lawn. Not everyone, but enough to turn Chloe's humiliation into a sanctioned event. Chloe didn't say anything. She just stood there, her hand protectively over her bump, her eyes wide, staring at me as if I were a ghost. The utter devastation on her face barely registered, because I was so consumed by the pride of my own perceived courage. Finally, she managed to turn and walk toward the house. She didn't run. She walked slowly, deliberately, a pregnant woman trying to maintain dignity while the world around her turned to dust. Later, I was told that as she tried to exit through the kitchen, 3 of my friends, the core of the group chat, had cornered her, calling her names and saying she ruined my life. I didn't see it then. All I saw was her retreating back, and I felt a brief, destructive moment of perverse triumph. I had won the argument. I had secured my position. But as the applause died down, I was left standing on the deck. My heart began to pound not with pride, but with a knowing, cold isolation. I had achieved control, but I had paid for it by destroying the most important thing in my life. The shame was beginning to bubble up, hot and swift, but I pushed it down, terrified of what would happen if I let myself admit I had become the monster I feared. In the days following the barbecue, the silence from Chloe was deafening, forcing me to confront the absolute gravity of my actions. She had gone to her parents' house, and every text I sent disappeared into a void. I felt an intense, agonizing pressure, not from public embarrassment, which I could handle, but from the realization that I might have irreversibly damaged my future. My initial reaction, sadly, was not remorse, but self-preservation. I texted her repeatedly, angry, accusatory messages. I told her she had embarrassed me by running away, that her hasty exit proved my suspicions. I blamed her for not staying to talk things out. I was more worried about salvaging my own ego than addressing the devastation I had caused. Valerie, of course, was ecstatic. She called me twice to commend my strength and assert that she had known all along Chloe was that type of girl. Justin, and the others in the Truth Seekers chat offered a stream of congratulatory messages, confirming I was the hero, not the villain. They were all complicit, and their affirmation made it easier to keep the shame at bay. But the silence from Chloe persisted. By the 3rd day, the anger was replaced by a cold, stomach-churning dread. I was losing her, and with her, the meticulously planned life I had built. Finally, she broke the silence with a single, unadorned text. I will meet you to talk. Diner on Elm Street, Saturday, 2 o'clock. My mother will be with me. If you refuse, we have nothing further to discuss. The demand for her mother's presence immediately put me on the back foot. It was a formal escalation, signaling that I was no longer dealing with my emotional partner, but with an established defensive unit. I tried to argue, claiming it needed to be just us, but Chloe's response was sharp and final. You made it public for 50 people, Isaac. You don't get to demand privacy now, I agreed, the defeat tasting like ash. The meeting felt less like a conversation and more like a deposition. I arrived precisely on time, but they were already seated in a vinyl booth near the back of the diner. Chloe looked exhausted but absolutely composed. Her mother, whose name I suddenly couldn't recall, sat beside her, her expression one of quiet, lethal disapproval. Before either of them could speak, I launched into my prepared speech, a defensive flurry of excuses. I talked about how I felt trapped, how I was under stress, how she had abandoned me at the barbecue. I focused entirely on my victimhood. When I finally ran out of breath, Chloe placed her hands flat on the table and looked me dead in the eye. Her gaze was steady, heartbreakingly devoid of the warmth I remembered. I need you to explain one thing to me, Isaac, she said, her voice clear. Right now, face to face, what evidence did you have that I ever cheated on you? Not feelings, not vibes, actual tangible evidence. I fidgeted with the sugar packets, unable to meet her gaze. The analytical part of my brain searched frantically for a concrete data point, but found nothing. I could only fall back on the script my paranoia had written. It wasn't about evidence, Chloe. It was about patterns. You were distant. You were always on your phone. The words sounded weak and hollow even to me. She didn't argue. She just calmly dismantled my claims. I was distant because I was exhausted and nauseous, growing a human inside my body. I was on my phone because I was coordinating my life, and I literally gave you access to my location and passwords, which you accepted. You knew exactly who I was talking to at all times. The logic was flawless, irrefutable. My justification, when exposed to the light, disintegrated. It was Chloe's mother who spoke next, her voice deep and steady. Isaac, do you understand what you did? The accusation itself is monstrous, but the manner in which you did it, the public humiliation, the family celebration, the fact that you involved those boys in your group chat to vote on her fidelity. Do you have any idea what it felt like for her to stand there, while your mother congratulated you? My defense mechanism kicked in. My mother was just being supportive. I mumbled, feeling the need to shield Valerie. Chloe shook her head. Supportive of what, Isaac? Of destroying the mother of her grandchild. Tell me what your mother meant when she said she was proud of you for not letting me trap you like your father got trapped. I asked you about that. The word trap hit me like a physical blow. It was the key, the origin point of the entire disaster, and I knew I couldn't deflect it. I felt the compulsion to protect Valerie, but the raw need to explain my insane behavior finally won out. I whispered that it was family stuff, but Chloe insisted. No, Isaac, it's the real issue. Your mother is projecting something onto me. If I'm accused of trapping you, I deserve to know where that accusation comes from. I finally confessed, the words spilling out of my mouth in a hurried, miserable rush. I told them that when Valerie and Franklin married, she was already pregnant with me. She had later confessed, during a vicious family fight, that she had gotten pregnant on purpose to keep him, because she feared he would leave. I told them that Franklin had stayed out of obligation, and that Valerie had spent decades telling me to beware, warning me that women would try to trap me the same way she had trapped my father. The table went silent again, but this time the silence was different. It was heavy with realization. I watched Chloe's expression shift from hurt to a chilling, analytical understanding. She wasn't just my accuser anymore. She was the psychologist, the detective. She understood that I hadn't been fighting her, but the ghost of my mother's actions. I had been fighting the possibility of becoming Franklin, the man trapped in a lifetime of regret. My accusation wasn't about evidence. It was about the lifelong trauma of being raised by a mother who saw commitment as manipulation. I had done the monstrous thing I feared most. I had allowed myself to be manipulated by my past, and in doing so, I had nearly destroyed my future. The shame was absolute and overwhelming. Armed with the knowledge of Valerie's foundational lie, the trap she sprung on my father, I struggled to reconcile the Chloe I loved with the paranoid narrative I had manufactured. The entire core of my suspicion had crumbled, not because of something Chloe did, but because of something my mother had admitted decades ago. The realization was a dizzying mix of relief and profound self-loathing. I spent the next 48 hours trying to apologize, trying to make the spreadsheet balance again. I was desperate to believe that naming the problem solved the problem. I see it now. I told Chloe over the phone, my voice thick with misery. My mother has been projecting her guilt and insecurity onto every woman in my life, and I let her poison my judgment. I believed her because the idea of being fooled, of ending up trapped like my father, terrifies me more than anything. Chloe listened patiently, but her tone remained distant, professional. Understanding the why of your betrayal, Isaac, does not undo the what of your betrayal. You didn't just doubt me privately. You didn't just tell your mother. You announced it to 50 people, and you let your friends turn my integrity into a joke. She then delivered her ultimatum, the terms for any path forward. I am getting my own official DNA test done the moment this baby is born. Not for you, but for my child's official record. And if you want any hope of being involved, you must correct the record with the same energy you used to destroy it. Everyone who heard the lie must hear the truth. Your family, your friends, everyone at that barbecue. Her demand was excruciating. A private apology to Chloe. Easy. A public retraction to my mother and my friends, admitting I was wrong, that I had been manipulated, that I had made a baseless accusation. That felt like social suicide. That felt like choosing to become the fool my mother warned me against. I stalled, mumbling something about the awkwardness of making another scene. Chloe simply hung up. The pressure intensified as I tried to clean up the mess in the truth seekers chat. I typed a long message explaining the misunderstanding, blaming my own stress, and stating clearly that the suspicion was unfounded. Justin was the first to reply. Dude, come on. We all know what's up. You don't have to play nice just because she caught you reading her phone. Don't let her run the narrative. Just stand your ground. Everyone knows what she is. I was aghast. I hadn't just asked them to stop. I had revealed the whole thing was my mistake, yet they refused to accept it. They were enjoying the drama and the feeling of superiority too much to let go of the villain narrative. I realized I hadn't been texting my friends. I had been texting the toxic embodiment of my own paranoia. Their refusal to acknowledge the truth was the final confirmation of how corrupted that circle had become. The ultimate confrontation, however, had to be with the source of the rot, Valerie. I drove to her house, feeling a nausea worse than any pregnancy symptom. I found her pruning roses in the garden, looking serene and entirely innocent. "We need to talk about what you did to Franklin," I said, dispensing with pleasantries. Valerie straightened slowly, her eyes narrowing. "That is history, Isaac. It is irrelevant. It was a mistake I made out of love, and it resulted in you. No, it was a manipulation, and it resulted in a lifetime of fear for me," I retorted, finally allowing the anger to surface. "You spent 30 years warning me that I would be trapped, and when Chloe got pregnant, you used your own guilt to poison my mind. I stood up in front of 50 people and humiliated the mother of my child because I was terrified of being the fool you said my father was." Valerie's composure shattered, her face twisted with fury. "She got to you. I knew it. She turned you against your own blood. You are choosing a gold digger over your mother, over the woman who warned you about what she is. If you believe her over me, then you are weak, Isaac. You are exactly the kind of man who lets women destroy him," she went on, escalating the emotional blackmail, demanding I choose her side, threatening to cut me off, to never speak to me again. I felt the familiar weight of obligation, the decades of conditioning that told me to fold, to apologize, to make peace. But this time, I saw the pure selfishness in her eyes. I saw the deep need for control that superseded even her affection for me. I stood my ground. "The truth is not a side, Mom. The truth is what you ran from, and I won't run from it anymore. I won't let you use your past to destroy my future." I left her screaming in the garden. Driving away, I felt an intense, agonizing pain of familial severance, but beneath it, a tiny, fragile spark of integrity. I had broken the bond of maternal manipulation. I had chosen the truth over the comfort of family acceptance. Now all that remained was to face the ultimate proof, the tiny human who would render all my spreadsheets and all my mother's fears irrelevant. The baby was coming, and I knew the real fight. The fight for my daughter and my own soul was just beginning. The battle at my mother's house left me reeling, drained by the emotional confrontation I had avoided for 3 decades. The pain of her rejection was intense, yet it was balanced by the fragile relief that I was finally free from her controlling narrative. The exhaustion was absolute, but the impending birth of my daughter gave me no luxury for rest. I had broken the bond of maternal manipulation, and now I had to fully commit to the role of a father, regardless of the wreckage I had made of the partnership. 2 days after leaving Valerie in her garden, Chloe went into labor. It was a Wednesday morning, just past 4 o'clock. I got the text from her mother, short and urgent. Contractions started. At hospital. "Come." I threw on the nearest clothes and ran out the door, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. All my planning, all my spreadsheets, all my defensive posturing vanished. There was only one certainty left: this baby was coming, and I had a right, an obligation, to be there. I broke every speed limit between my apartment and the hospital, arriving within the hour looking, I am sure, like a panicked ghost. When I found them, Chloe was already in a room, grimacing through a wave of contractions. Her mother was next to her, a quiet, powerful presence. Chloe glanced at me as I entered, her face pale with effort, and the only emotion I read there was relief that I had actually shown up. The labor was a long, brutal marathon that instantly humbled me. I, the man who believed he could analyze and control all outcomes, was reduced to a helpless observer of raw, biological power. I stood by Chloe's side for the next 14 hours, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering useless reassurances. I tried to focus on the logical progression of the labor, the dilation, the timing of the pain, but the sheer intensity of what she was enduring stripped away all my analytical defenses. I felt completely exposed, stripped of my armor of control. At some point, I stopped caring about the accusations, the group chat, or Valerie. My entire world narrowed to the small, intense space of that room and the agonizing, rhythmic pressure Chloe was fighting through. I was no longer the betrayed partner or the terrified son. I was just Isaac witnessing an impossible creation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the chaos subsided. Our daughter arrived, small and loud, a perfect little girl weighing 6 pounds and 11 ounces. When the nurse placed her on Chloe's chest, the tiny, screaming presence instantly erased the last 7 months of paranoia, doubt, and destructive pride. I looked at her, my daughter Ada. She was minute impossibly perfect, with a shock of dark hair and a fierce, angry cry. I reached out, tracing the outline of her tiny hand with my finger, and I was completely, utterly overwhelmed. I didn't just cry, I sobbed, full-on silent, racking sobs of relief, of fear, and of unconditional love. This was the emotional breakthrough, the moment where I achieved maximum vulnerability. She was real. She was here. She was mine. I looked up and saw Chloe watching me, her eyes tired but holding a flicker of the old warmth. For 10 minutes, we existed in a perfect bubble, me, Chloe, and Ada experiencing a pure moment of parenthood. Then the door opened and Valerie walked in. I strongly suspected my sister Chelsea had been the one to tip her off. I don't know who called her. Probably my sister Chelsea, who had been sending me texts all day that I had ignored. Valerie came in looking triumphant and entirely inappropriate for a sterile hospital room, wearing a pressed suit and a calculated expression of ownership. She walked straight toward the bassinet where Ada was resting, her movements swift and confident, as if she were reclaiming property. "Well, let me see my granddaughter," she announced, reaching out for the baby. A sharp, defensive instinct flared in my chest, primal and instantaneous. I stepped forward, putting myself between her and the bassinet. "No," I said, the word coming out louder and firmer than I intended. The nurse, who was checking Chloe's vitals, paused. Valerie stopped, her hand frozen midair. She looked offended, as if I had questioned her right to oxygen. "Excuse me. I have every right to hold my granddaughter, Isaac." My heart was still thumping from the adrenaline of the birth, but my mind was utterly clear. I saw the threat she posed, not just to Ada, but to Chloe's peace, and to the fragile, new truth I had found. Valerie had encouraged my suspicions, celebrated my cruelty, and called Chloe a trap. She had forfeited this right. I looked at my mother, the woman I had been terrified of disobeying for 3 decades, and the conviction in my voice was absolute. "You need to leave, Mom. Chloe just gave birth. She decides who is in this room, and she doesn't want you here." Valerie stared at me, aghast. I had never spoken to her that way, especially not in front of witnesses. Her shock was profound. She looked to Chloe for confirmation, then back to me, demanding I retract the statement, demanding I choose her side. "I mean it," I said, my voice steady. "Go!" She left, a furious, wounded figure, but not before delivering one final venomous shot to Chloe. "This isn't over. You might have fooled my son, but you haven't fooled me." I sank back into the chair, shaking. I looked at Chloe, who had watched the entire exchange, and she gave me the smallest, most exhausted nod of thanks. I had finally achieved the external climax. I had confronted my greatest fear, and in defending my daughter and Chloe's peace, I had chosen a new life over the destructive legacy of my mother. The fight for Ada was far from over, but for the first time, I felt truly ready for it. The battle at the hospital had bought us peace, but it hadn't bought silence. As soon as Chloe and Ada were discharged, and we settled into the uneasy truce of co-parenting at Chloe's parents' house, the next wave of conflict hit. Valerie's silence was heavy and calculating, the kind of silence that precedes an inevitable storm. My phone was constantly buzzing with texts from Chelsea, my sister, who called me a betrayer and claimed I was being led around by the nose. 5 days after Ada's birth, the results of the DNA test arrived. Chloe had arranged the test herself through a highly reputable, official lab, determined to have undeniable, professional documentation. I was standing in the kitchen when the email came through. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. The result was exactly what I knew it would be, yet seeing it in black and white hit me with overwhelming forces, a 99.98% probability that I was the biological father. The wave of relief was immediately followed by a powerful, cold surge of anger. This entire 7-month ordeal, the emotional terrorism, the public humiliation, the destruction of my relationship, had been founded on nothing but a sick projection of my mother's past and my own weakness. The numbers, the data I always craved, were finally here, vindicating Chloe utterly. I sent the results to Chloe first, along with a lengthy message that finally contained genuine, unfiltered remorse. I told her I knew now, absolutely, that I had been wrong, cruel, and foolish. She accepted the apology but reiterated her condition. You need to share those results with everyone who heard the accusation, Isaac. With the same crowd, the same friends, and the same family who clapped for the lie. I knew this was the ultimate test. It wasn't enough to privately believe the truth. I had to publicly wear the shame of the lie. I agreed and prepared myself for the final showdown. I drove to my childhood home later that day, holding the official lab report like a shield. I found Valerie and Franklin sitting in the living room. The atmosphere was frosty. I placed the results on the coffee table. This is Ada's DNA test, I stated, my voice steady. The results are conclusive. She is my daughter. I had expected disappointment from Valerie, perhaps a quiet retreat. I had not expected the explosion that followed. Valerie didn't even pick up the paper. She didn't have to. The truth was already a dagger to her reality. They can be faked, Isaac, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You can buy those papers online. She knows someone who works at a lab. This proves nothing, except that she's good at covering her tracks and that she's successfully turned you against me. Her defiance was insane, a total refusal to let go of the conspiracy theory that justified her life. Then Franklin, my quiet, long-suffering father, finally snapped. He had been a silent witness to 3 decades of my mother's emotional manipulation, and he had been a silent witness to my own cruel betrayal of Chloe. Now he was silent no more. Stop it, Valerie, Franklin said, his voice quiet but sharp, cutting through the venom. It's enough, you're being insane. Valerie turned on him, her face contorted. You're only defending her because you wish you had never married me. You've spent this entire marriage looking for an escape, and now you're using this girl as an excuse. I gave you everything, including Isaac, and this is how you repay me. Franklin rose slowly from his armchair, towering over her. Trapping me wasn't giving me everything, Valerie. It was taking my choice away. I stayed out of obligation, and I watched you spend 30 years making everyone around you miserable because of your own guilt. I watched you convince our son to do the same thing to the mother of his child. I'm not staying quiet anymore. It was the most emotional, unfiltered moment I had ever witnessed between my parents. It was brutal and final. Valerie screamed at him, a high-pitched, desperate sound of a woman losing her last vestige of control. She then turned her fury back to me. You are dead to me, Isaac. You choose that woman and her lies over your own blood. You lose us all. Don't come crying to me when she finally takes your money and walks away. I left the house shortly after, leaving my parents locked in a vicious, irreparable fight. My father followed me to the door, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, son, Franklin said, his eyes filled with a weary sadness. You stood up for your family, the real family. Don't look back. I drove away from my childhood home, forever severing the toxic bond. Ada was mine, mathematically proven, but the path to that proof had cost me my partner and my mother. I felt the profound relief of personal integrity, the knowledge that I was no longer a vessel for Valerie's trauma. But I also felt the pain of having chosen truth over the comfort of family loyalty, a sacrifice I knew I would be paying for the rest of my life. The vindication was swift, but the fallout was devastating. My mother's anger was not just a tantrum, it was a permanent rejection. I was now on the outside. But out here in the cold, I finally had the truth, and I finally had my daughter. The fight against the gossip and the lies, however, was still raging. 2 days later, Chloe's parents found the word, LAR, crudely keyed into their mailbox. The war had moved from emotional blackmail to petty, physical threat. I knew then that Valerie and her camp would never stop. I am now father to Ada, divorced from the toxic structure of my childhood family, and navigating the stark reality of co-parenting. The chaos of the past 7 months has settled into an uneasy, functional rhythm. Chloe and I are not together. We never will be again. I lost the partner I love because I failed the one test that mattered, the test of basic trust. I realize now that the love was real, but my own internal architecture was flawed, designed only to detect betrayal, not to sustain faith. My visits with Ada are strictly scheduled, meticulously noted in a shared digital calendar. I come over every afternoon after work. I change diapers, I hold her while she sleeps, and I learn the slow, small miracles of fatherhood. I watch Chloe interact with our daughter, patient, gentle, and utterly devoted, and I see the true woman I betrayed. I still love her, but my love is now purely respectful, acknowledging the deep, unbridgeable divide my actions created. I have spent countless hours in reflection, trying to reconcile the 30-year-old analyst who valued data above all else with the father who now understands that the most important truths have no data points. I realized that my need for proof was never about Chloe's fidelity, it was a shield against Valerie's dark legacy. By seeking to prove Chloe was a liar, I was trying to prove I wasn't my father. I was trying to prove I couldn't be fooled. But in the end, I was the only one who ended up fooling himself. One evening, I forced myself to write the retraction. I didn't text it to the group chat. I posted it publicly on social media, tagged my mother and my former friends, and ensured the privacy settings were off. I made the announcement with the same level of visibility as my original accusation. It wasn't just a quiet post. I made sure the retraction was the first thing everyone who followed me or had witnessed the barbecue would see. I wrote about the shame of my actions, the error of my judgment, and the toxicity that had clouded my view. I stated clearly and without equivocation that Chloe never cheated, that Ada was my biological daughter, and that my public accusations were baseless and cruel. I attached the official DNA report, the black and white data that I had always needed, but which now served only as a monument to my own failure. The response was predictable. Valerie called, screaming, confirming her promise that I was dead to her. Chelsea followed with texts calling me weak. Justin and the group chat were immediately deleted. My father, Franklin, simply sent me a text. "Well done, Isaac. You finally chose." The choice was painful, but it was definitive. I was excommunicated from the family and the friendship circle that had fostered my worst tendencies. The cost was high, but the payoff was integrity. I often sit in Chloe's parents' quiet living room, holding Ada, watching the tiny rise and fall of her chest, and I feel a profound peace I haven't known since childhood. Ada is the new logic in my life. She is the ultimate, undeniable truth. I look at her and I see not a risk to be managed, but a person to be cherished. I know the fight isn't entirely over. Valerie will continue to spread her venom, and Chelsea's petty vindictiveness, like keying the mailbox, will surface again. But Chloe is strong, and I am finally, truly on her side. We are aligned in our devotion to Ada. Our romantic relationship is a sacrifice I made, a price I paid for my own paranoia. But I am determined that Ada will grow up knowing exactly what happened. And more importantly, knowing that her father, when finally presented with the truth, stood up for her mother, for her dignity, and for the purity of their shared beginning. The old Isaac, the one who tried to use spreadsheets to contain the chaos of the heart, is gone. In his place is a man who understands that vulnerability is not weakness, but the prerequisite for love. I may have lost my partner, but I have gained my daughter, and in doing so I have found myself. I have the receipts, the DNA results, and the certainty that Ada is safe. And that, finally, is enough.